This is a real pleasure to be back in front of ISNR. Um, I do remember happier times, and in particular, my thoughts go back to the first meeting of ISNR, which was on Catalina Island, a particularly happy place where I first met Barry Sermon and discovered a lot of his insights into desynchronization, which formed a lot of the basis for the work that we basically have been doing on our focus measure. So right now, let me bring us to the current and share my screen and talk about the problem that really we're facing as a society right now, even more than we have before, which is that many people are very unhappy, and I think that creates an incredibly difficult trade-off, because the COVID crisis has taken away so many of our external sources of happiness and other positive feelings, and may continue to do so indefinitely. And so what happens is that people, after a while, decide that they basically are really tired of being unhappy, and they make risky decisions to go out and join the groups that they had been involved with before, or other groups. And essentially what this does is it makes the difficulty of controlling the coronavirus much more intense. So the question is, what can be done, and particularly, what is it that we as a society or as a profession can do? The first thing is we don't talk about unhappiness, and we really ought to be talking about that. We discuss anxiety and stress, which are usually, to some degree, the opposite of happiness, but we're also strongly motivated by our desire to be happy. And it seems like even in the best of times, unhappiness was a problem, and it was a problem that we didn't recognize as being clinical until probably Ken Blum came along with his reward deficiency syndrome idea. But unhappiness was always a major cause of mental problems. And now I think it's even more of a cause, although I don't think that increasing happiness is something that has been labeled as an FDA-related kind of pursuit. So I want to take you back many years, actually, and talk to you about what we call the hypophoria hypothesis when I was working at the National Institute on Drug Abuse Addiction Research Center in the late 70s. This was an idea that was originated by the director there, and it turned out that there were 3 different groups of ARC researchers that developed several variations of this idea that addicts and alcoholics were characterized by hypophoria, a low mood state without obvious depression, and scales that measured their particular variety of in the interpretation of this state. Well, Dr. David Kay and I were kind of the latest on the scene, and we divided hypophoria into 2 subscales, defeated and joyless. And actually, if you think about it, joyless is a joy deficiency, and so this happiness deficiency idea has gone back in my professional history for a very long time. Um, Basically, we worked with something called the Social Experience Questionnaire, which was a 560-item questionnaire. Wow. An MMPI of happiness and other states that was derived by Chuck Hartson, who was basically the psychometrician at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and administered to groups of alcoholics and addicts and controls. And what happened was that Dr. David Kay, a psychiatrist, who was my immediate supervisor and collaborator in this, thought we could do better at separating the groups by rationally constructing subscales: joyless, lack of confidence, low energy, and unpopularity. So we reanalyzed this social experience questionnaire, and we found, though, that the last three were highly correlated, and we eventually collapsed them into a defeated scale. We published all of this in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, and what we found was that actually we could differentiate alcoholics from addicts in a very interesting way. The alcoholics and the addicts were both defeated. On the other hand, it seems that the real pathology of the addicts also included this joyless characteristic. And so we became very interested in that, but unfortunately, because of some restrictions on the kind of research that they wanted to do, the entire group was broken up, and a remnant moved on to Baltimore, but we did not continue this research. And it took about 15, 20 years for Dr. Ken Blum to propose that there was a biological basis for this, and that this was a deficiency in dopamine-mediated brain reward systems. And so this was the idea of reward deficiency syndrome, for which he's internationally famous. And it turns out that despite all their initial efforts to disprove this idea, the National Institute on Drug Abuse and Dr. Nora Volkow in particular have now adopted this as the party line as to what the basic cause of a lot of addiction is. And Dr. Blum has found that 29% of Americans actually have a genetic dopamine deficiency. Now, a couple of years ago, Dr. Blum, who tends to be a little bit outspoken, spoke at ISNR, and he ended his talk with a slide that I'll never forget, in which he said, "Happiness equals dopamine." Now, I'm not going to really espouse that view, but I think that there is a lot of variability in happiness that is accounted for by dopamine levels. And the thing is that these are levels that I believe can be modified, and the whole system of creating happiness can be modified from within. I think that we can teach clients that a source of happiness can be reached within themselves, and that's really important at this particular time. In other words, what we're trying to accomplish here is to tell people that they don't necessarily need to reach outside themselves for all of the activities that are so difficult and dangerous, and basically what they can do is to develop the ability to enhance their happiness, and that this will be a lasting kind of an effect. And so we discovered this when we started out by using our Eureka training, and I have to give Dr. Sakadze a huge amount of credit for actually doing this experiment. And he found that we could teach people to be happier, and that this would last for, as you will see in a little while, at least 4 months by using this Eureka training. And when I say happiness, by the way, I'm not just talking about something that is specific. This is kind of an axis in subjective space, and in fact, there are researchers who would basically call this all valence, but that is a word that I still take back to chemistry and have difficulty incorporating here. So anyway, we will talk about the different types of emotions that seem to share this ability to increase the Eureka measurement later. But the basic idea here that came to me more and more as we started to think about this is that, a lot of people are looking for happiness. And even those who go and become avid meditators are really looking, in part at least, for the pursuit of happiness, which of course is very, very enshrined in the American way in all the documents founding our republic. And so what I think we're trying to do here is to encourage people to generalize this approach from the neurofeedback sessions that can be used to train it on our Happi Trainer with Eureka to their real lives by essentially a deliberate practice. And it teaches you, this simple practice teaches you to create a moment of happiness whenever you wish. And it's sourced from inside directly without thinking about anything but, I'm going to be happy. And I'm going to be happy like I was in that session. And so basically what we're talking about is a practice where we're combining slightly deeply breathing and increasing the happiness and other positive feelings as you exhale. And you do this for a number of times until you really notice the change you want. I can do that now with the amount of practice that I've had in a breath or two. And the point is that it is something that I think can be woven into our lives, and it's certainly possible to combine this with meditation practices, but it goes further than that. It's something that rather than being confined to 20 minutes in which you are trying to create a specific state, it's something that can essentially happen pretty much any time that you want it to. And of course, the real talent with this is to try to do it when you have reason to feel unhappy. And that's where increasing the strength of the training can be more and more valuable. So essentially what we're doing here is to launch a very timely new kind of product, the Happi Trainer with an I. And to increase positive feelings, and as you'll see, it also seems to be related to decreasing stress and obviously counteracting this happiness deficit that we are developing and sinking into more and more without even talking about it. Improving our coping skills, enhance our future health. We will be talking about that in a little bit more details. And it turns out that there is actually some evidence from other studies that I don't have time to go into that you can actually improve your immune response to viruses. And this was summarized in a psychologytoday.com article. Now, as far as the people that are in this particular profession, I think we can be of great service by trying to spread this. And we can also derive some income from this by providing home training using a very simple system that we provide in the Happi Trainer. The Happi Trainer basically involves, at the moment, just a very simple headband with a couple of electrodes in an ear clip and a module that will take this information and send it to a Windows laptop. More on that later. So, going into this from the psychological perspective, there's been a lot of interest in positive psychology. And I remember many years ago when I was involved in Dr. Marty Seligman's first Authentic Happiness course. And basically Marty and Dr. Ed Diener and the founders of this field have, with one exception, Barbara Fredrickson, really ignored the biology of it. And so their studies indicated that only 10% of the sources of happiness are modifiable by their positive psychology methods. 40% have to do with the environment you're in, your life, and your relationships, and so on. And they put 50%, the remaining 50%, as genetic, and they made it part of the set point that basically they postulated. They really didn't think about the idea that there were biological approaches that could change that set point. So they ignored physiology, they ignored epigenetics, and even worse, they ignored the fact that the reward system, the dopamine system, was discovered by a psychologist, Dr. James Olds. So this approach, obviously, as you know, differs from positive psychology. And what we're talking about is the idea of controlling the emotional centers in your brain and to become happier by using neurofeedback and practicing it with Happitation. And what we're discovering, I think, here is that there are some very basic brain systems. And there's actually a crosstalk between the 40 hertz system that we originally started to work with and the dopamine system. And the reason is basically that the 40 hertz system is in the brain primarily to teach you how to learn something new and to enhance your memory and your attention as you do that. But nature, being very wise, essentially has created a reward system so that you continue to go out and learn something new because it's very good for your survival. So that's where the dopamine system comes in, and it turns out that the 40 hertz system seems to cue the happiness and the memory and the attention improvements that are related to dopamine and dopamine levels. Now, just going back for a moment to provide a little setting for our research. All of our research on this issue has been done with the Peak Achievement Trainer and the deluxe measurements in it that when we added in Eureka. So the deluxe edition that is this 40 hertz edition. But we have now simplified it from 77 designs to 5. And we've kept the core combination of Eureka and Focus Neurofeedback, which produced the really impressive published results, improving happiness, memory, attention, and autistic issues. It's still single channel, basically center of the forehead to the left ear. But now we've created a learning sequence that leads directly to enhancing the combination of Eureka and Focus. And as I've said, we've cut it down to 5 brainwave biofeedback designs that are available to actually train you pretty quickly, get to be able to work with that combination, which I will show you in a minute. So, just very briefly to go over the focus ingredient that we started out with back in 1998 when we first introduced the Peak Achievement Trainer. Focus measures single-pointedness of focus on a particular object of attention. So it's like a zoom camera. And the more that you zoom in on something, the higher that the level of this will go. And the more intensely that you are single pointed, for example, on the top of the feedback bar, the higher it goes up. And Tom Budzinski thought it was the only system that actually reversed his age-related, not his adult ADHD, and incorporated it in his brain brightening program. And so he did a lot of the initial research with this in seniors, and combining it particularly with light sound techniques. And as I'll show you very briefly, we can measure attention span and actually double it in 5 sessions. The measure is stable enough that basically we can make a task from keeping it above a certain threshold and actually measure the amount of time that somebody can do that. And we can double that in 5 sessions. And we also showed some very rapid improvements in children diagnosed with ADHD. Tato tells me that in general, the average number of sessions to bring them back into the normal range is about 15. So this is a study that was done by Dr. Louis Choka. Louis was the founder of the Center for Enhanced Performance at the Army Center at West Point, and then he retired and worked with a Fortune 500 company and found that he was able to essentially double the amount of attention span in 5 sessions of training. And this is some of Tato's work, in which he looked at the IVA, auditory and visual, and showed that you could improve the sustained attention quotients very strongly in 12 sessions. And we also showed that there were focus improvements in autism. But there were also remarkable Neureka improvements in autism, which we won't go into because we talked about that last year. And so, what is this Neureka? We discovered the Neureka protocol somewhat by accident, actually. That's a long story. But basically, it's a clarification of the 40 hertz gamma EEG rhythm involved in memory and learning. But that's only one of the EEG rhythms that occurs at 40 hertz. So there's a way of processing EEG here that essentially can be used to measure and train the brain system for processing new discoveries and learning. And that's why we see improvements in memory and improvements in attention that are actually better than the improvements in attention that we have with the previous focus alert protocol. We said it feels like making a new discovery, and that new discoveries make you feel more aware, happy, and satisfied while they enhance your learning and memory. It stimulates the prefrontal pleasure center, and we have called this, or we have dubbed a particular area right under our sensor the prefrontal pleasure center, but actually I'll show you a picture of it based on an fMRI study that was done at Stanford. And it turns out that the dopamine receptors in the cerebral cortex are most concentrated right at that particular area. But first, let me just give you an idea of what we're doing here. And so this is
wearing a wireless headset or headband with electrodes that measure key brainwave signals, you learn to be in charge of the brainwaves by using them to control the playback of a DVD on your computer. This power over the brainwaves allows you to play, brighten, and enlarge the images. As you become happier and the Neureka output increases, the picture gets larger. You soon begin to understand how to create the feelings that are necessary to keep the picture larger, directly, without the use of words or thoughts.
So, getting into the nuts and bolts of the psychophysiology here, actually, this original 40 hertz rhythm was discovered not by EEG, although Daniel Shear did a lot of work on this. He never differentiated the two types of 40 hertz that we're going to talk about here. And the one that we're talking about right now is called intralaminar because it's the EEG that 40 hertz that comes from within the lamina of the thalamus. So it's the center part of the thalamus. And it's different than the specific relays to the cortex, which are 40 hertz among other frequencies. As you know, 40 hertz could be considered as a continuation upwards of the beta rhythms when you're highly stimulated. But the two are different because the specific relays to the cortex go through the outside of the thalamus, outside the lamina. So Rudolfo Linus found that it originated in the center intralaminar, that is inside the lamina nuclei of the thalamus, which are non-specific. That is, they are not tied to a particular sensory modality, and that there were recurrent loops between the thalamus and the cortex. Lusaki has talked about this in his book too. All of a sudden it seems like I've gone green here, and I'm not exactly sure what is going on. Is that something with Zoom? Okay. I'm back again. Can everybody see that? Good. Okay. So, basically what happens is that this 40 hertz rhythm scans the brain 40 times a second, like taking a flash picture going back and forth from front to back of the brain to sample and bind together the various responses in the cortical surface layers to the same event, and brings that back to the center of the thalamus. I'll show you a sequence of illustrations here. And so basically, for example, you can imagine this as a highly idealized situation in which somebody is in a social situation, and the information input basically is brought to the appropriate portions of the cortex, and then that's where a lot of our story kind of leaves things. But actually what happens is the 40 hertz rhythm starts from the center of the thalamus right here, and basically it scans from front to back 40 times a second, and the information that it picks up from the cortical surface layers, which has picked it up from the inputs that have been relayed to those layers and analyzed by those layers, basically comes back to the center of the thalamus, and it's integrated. This used to be called the event binding rhythm. In other words, it binds together all the aspects of the inputs and the memories into an event. And in fact, one of the things that's most interesting about this, it's too bad that we can't do in-person demos, is that when I ask somebody to just remember what's on the screen, then the Neureka level will go up. When I ask somebody to close his eyes and then remember what they just saw, the Neureka level will go up. If I ask them to remember something from their remote past, like their first day in college, the Neureka level will also go up. So there's a memory component that is probably in the cortex, and that is being sampled and integrated into the event. And then, of course, what happens is if you get a response. This is part of a longer series of slides in which we look at what happens in autism, where we think that essentially you're not getting a normal response because that system is not working properly. So I'm going to show you briefly how well people can learn to do this very, very quickly. And this is a 10-year-old girl, and you're going to see two sides of a screen, and she is going to be okay. On the left, you're going to see the Neureka measurement averaged over 4 seconds. On the right, over 10 seconds, just because we wanted to make this a little bit clearer. And then on the bottom, we actually have a trend display, and the trend display looks at where that 10-second measure has been over time. So this is being happy, and you can see how quickly her happiness raises this up.
Very good. Okay. Goodness. I'm going to blow this off the roof. That's just excellent. All right. And then
Okay, so this is unhappiness, and you can see how quickly that shifted on the left. Of course, on the right, everything is averaged over a much longer period of time.
Let's switch back to joy.
Right now we're using 6 seconds. So now we're looking at joy, which does basically the same thing as happiness. Okay, so now we go back to calm, and we're looking for something more neutral, and sure enough it is. Now we're doing something more difficult for most people, which is feelings of love. They are related, but it takes a little bit more coaxing. Usually I have to ask them to think about something that's not difficult, like a pet. No, so love with no problems. So this is her favorite pet now. Now we're doing what we call the baseline, repeating a number to see what the baseline really would look like. And you can see on the left that that baseline is really low.
Started taping today. Do we have any extra practice?
Yep. So that was actually something that we showed to Mattel, and they became very interested in trying to create another brainwave toy from it, but they could never quite figure out how to do that. And I was kind of sorry, but I was also kind of glad, because I don't really think that this is just something that deserves to be toyed with. I think this is something that actually has more serious kinds of uses. So this is the kind of screen that we normally have, and you can see that we've got, obviously, on the right, a video that comes from a DVD or something that's downloaded, and then the actual size of that would be controlled by the size of the blue. We don't have that working right here. And the blue is the Neureka, the yellow is the focus, and we're able to look at the trend over time and see how that changes. So going back to the fMRI studies and talking about where we put our electrode, which is right here in the center of the forehead, this is a study done by a psychologist at Stanford, and basically what he shows is that pleasurable experiences excite the medial prefrontal cortex selectively even more than the dopamine tracts. And so these include, of course, things like winning money and other more salient pleasures. But it turns out anticipation also enhances that activity. So we did 4 experiments. Beverly Rubik did the first experiment with me, and then Tato and I did 3 other experiments that linked Eureka to positive feelings. And in general, what we found was that thinking about positive feelings like happiness, joy, delight, pleasure, satisfaction, gratitude, and appreciation all enhanced Eureka, as does anticipating a good time. And we found that Neureka training improved happiness, memory, and attention. We'll show you some of that data in a moment. And we found that there was a long-lasting effect of that happiness training. So this was a study, the first study, in which basically we put this mystery measure that went up and down on the screen in front of people, and we asked them to get into a particular mood and or experience. And basically what we asked them to do was to track how well the ups and downs of that particular measure reflected their particular experience of that mood. And so we have the question of the strength of the relationship is on this scale, and essentially what we're talking about is that 80 is very strong relationship, and we're going all the way down from happy, loving, grateful, fully aware, anticipating something good, to satisfied, and that's just 60, and that's a strong relationship, and then it goes down from there. So it's basically a rather wide spectrum of feelings that produce this, and the psychologists that have come up with the idea that you have kind of a circle with valence representing this dimension, and so you have up and down on the circle for high and low valence, and then you have also another one that has to do with actually alertness and arousal going in the other direction. I tend to think that they have some good insight with that, and we have the biological basis of this in part. And so we also have negative relationships. There were several words, several experiences that were negatively related, and the negative relationships included bored, stressed, and disappointed. And this is another study where we actually just exposed people to words, and we asked them, we gave them 6 seconds to produce a feeling associated with the word. And we found significant changes in all of the words that we have outlined here from the baseline. The baseline was the repeated numbers baseline that we used with the girl in order to keep their minds off of anything else. And so what we found is that there was a real enhanced amount of eureka that we were able to measure in just 6 seconds with joy, pleasure, delight, happy, and love. Love was a little bit more difficult. And so we picked actually the 5 descriptions of positive emotions from the first experiment that were most related to eureka, and we compared them with 5 emotionally neutral descriptions and 5 negative emotions. And this is another experiment where we showed them this for 20 seconds or so, and they were asked to form an image or thought and induce any feeling or state associated with the word. And we used both this eyes open baseline that we'd used before, and the better one in which they were occupied by repeating 3-digit numbers to themselves. And so what we've got here is basically the original baseline, the repeating numbers baseline, the positive emotions, and then you have the negative and neutral emotions, neither of which are significantly different from the baseline. And that leads us to think that we've got sort of a one-dimensional continuum, which doesn't go down below unhappy. It doesn't go deep like depression, and is different from depression. And so what we think is that this is a measure of happiness that has to do with the activation of dopamine because of this and the similarities that we also see with dopamine's known and well documented effects on enhancing memory, and enhancing attention. And so we found that the Eureka during the happy feelings in that experiment was also better than during the unhappy ones. And we also found that we could do, we trained people in another experiment in which we looked at their happiness actually during the session with a knob, and we were able to document their changes from moment to moment in happiness. But we didn't really, I didn't really include that here. But what we have is the effects across sessions. And it seems that 12 25-minute sessions enhanced happiness by 31%. And actually, there were a couple of people, or a few people, that were close to the top, and the top was happy all the time, and nobody uses that. So they were already happy most of the time. And so if you didn't count them, then basically what we found was that it was 50% improvement. And there was a decrease in the Beck Depression Inventory scores by about 27%. Now, what's really remarkable about this is that not only did we have this increase in happiness right after the training, but we checked this at just about 4 months after each person's training, and we found that it was just about the same. Some people went a little bit up, some people went a little bit down, but the average was still significant. And for a small group, that was rather remarkable. I'd like to continue with that. So now, let's talk about the importance of this, because it's not just happiness that we're affecting. Because there are 160 studies that indicate that 157 of them indicate that the happier you are now, the healthier you are later. So, remember Bob Call and Future Health? Well, now we're back talking about future health again. But this is real enhancement of future health. And so happiness seems to lead to better future health, but it also turns out in another review that the Diener and Chan did that it predicts success. So that the happier you are, the more people want to be around you, and the more successful you turn out to be. So we picked one of these studies, and I particularly like this because it was a big study, nearly 10,000 people, done by the Australian Department of Labour back in 2001, and then they came back and followed up the same people in 2004. And the results indicated that those who were happy most of the time in 2001 were over 50% more likely to be healthier and free of long-term health concerns in 2004. So we used the same happiness question in our evaluation of happiness pre, post, and follow-up. And so what we would like to be able to do is to jump to the conclusion that neurofeedback can actually affect long-term health. I think we're probably not quite there yet, but it certainly is very, very positive evidence. And there are also, as I was saying before, several experiments which were summarized in a blog on Psychology Today's website by Dr. Mark Holder that indicate that happiness leads to increased resistance to viruses. And some of those actually were not long-term studies. They were immediate changes in resistance to viruses. So, as I said before, training with Neureka and Focus, this combination screen, which worked in such a way that Neureka was the principal kind of feedback. Focus also was there to keep them on track, so that it would get the picture would get dim and stop if they weren't focused. So there was some incidental learning perhaps of focus. This increased memory and attention, and so we found that we tested before and after training with the microcog, which is an instrument that Herschel Tumum and Tom Budzinski used to use a lot, and we found that memory increased 13%, and that was probably responsible for the information processing accuracy increase. And there were some very significant improvements on the IVA Plus. Can't go into them in detail, but this T-score of 17.183 really is remarkable for response control quotient. And there are several others that are very significant. And so, I think it's something that is rather surprising and probably stronger than the study that we did with the ADHD using our focused alert protocol. But we'd love to do a direct contrast of those. So, in conclusion, there are two biological brain systems that we're working with here. The focused brain system controls how we pay attention, that is single-pointed to wide. And Carl Pribram once told me that, the stimulation of the prefrontal cortex in the center actually makes attention more single-pointed. And if you look at the stimulation of the temporal pole, that brings the attention out wider. But the Neureka system is a different system. It controls what we pay attention to. So it controls kind of paying attention to the big picture of everything that's going on in the room, the event, if you will. And so you can have both of them operating at the same time. And Les Femi pointed that out many years ago. So in terms of what we think will move the field forward, we offer this complete package for home use, which can be used also in the office. And the Happi Trainer features either a plastic or leather headband with 3 dry sensors. There's a lightweight. We've got those 3 sensors here, 2 and then 1 on the ear clip. And there's a lightweight electronics module, which digitizes the brainwaves and sends them to our customized software. And it just simply slips on around your head, like so, with Velcro. I've always been a big Velcro fan. And then we basically clip on the ear clip, and we can get a signal from that, provided we turn it on first. And so we're offering that, and we are including for the time being the Dell laptop that still has a DVD player in it. We know that they're fading from the scene, and we would love to create software that doesn't involve them and does a lot more streaming. Interested in finding collaborators for that. And so this is the plastic headband, And this is the leather one. And as you can see, that leather one fits kids pretty well. And what's really rather neat about this is that with this band you can actually perform a session without ever touching the client. You just clean the band with an alcohol swab and then leave it on the table on a clean towel. So you're taking it off and you leave it on the table, and then the client walks in the office, puts it on as simply as we have, except that they clean their heads with an alcohol swab as well, adjusts the placement, and fastens the Velcro while you supervise from a distance. And when the session is done, the client takes it off and puts it back on the same towel. So basically, what you've got is touchless neurofeedback, or no-touch neurofeedback, which we think may be particularly appropriate for these COVID times. And so obviously you can create customized packages for your customers, and obviously there are a number of things you can do using your imagination, and you can supervise via TeamViewer or Zoom if you wish. You can teach Happitation or MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction training, or meditation training. But the idea is that you're doing that with a tinge of enhancing happiness as well. And again, I really think that a lot of people are interested in being happy more than they are even being mindful. There are a number of great sages that have, including the Dalai Lama, who said that happiness is more important. And obviously, our founding fathers talked about the pursuit of happiness and not the pursuit of mindfulness. So you can create a new way of doing your neurofeedback practice that adds on to what you're currently doing, or makes it possible for you to practice at a distance. And you can train the entire family of your client and charge them per client, in addition to supplying them the system. So in general, we think that the new Happi Trainer can improve mood, stress, and focus at home or the office.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jon. I am going to have to stop the session now. I'm sure that people would love to connect with you. There's your contact information.